Hey there, tonight we're stepping away from Kings and Crusades just for a moment. We're going somewhere stranger, louder, wilder. The medieval world wasn't just plagues and prayers. It had its games, its competitions, its madness. Because when the workday ended, if it ever did, people didn't just rest. They ran, they wrestled, they threw things they shouldn't and chased animals they couldn't catch. And what they called sport, you might call completely insane. Some games had rules, most didn't. They were born in villages and taverns in meadows stomped flat by bare feet and bad ideas. They weren't for fun, they were for pride, for bragging rights, for something to tell stories about when the fire burned low and the ale ran warm. So if you're the kind of person who finds peace in weird corners of history, who drifts off best when the world gets a little unpredictable, then settle in, dim the lights, wrap yourself in something warm, and let's explore the strange, the forgotten, and the utterly unhinged world of medieval sports. If this video helps you relax, go ahead and subscribe, but only if it genuinely brings you peace. And drop a comment below. What's the weirdest sport you've ever played or heard of? Where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it where you are? It's always comforting to know who's out there, drifting off to the same old madness. Now then, let's begin with the first game. One with no ball, no court, just pain. Shin kicking, the farmer's duel. You read that right. Shin kicking, forget swords, forget archery. Some of the most brutal one-on-one showdowns in medieval England were settled not with weapons, but with boots and pain. A lot of pain. This wasn't just a game, it was a grudge match. Picture a muddy field at dawn, fog clinging to the grass like it's holding its breath. Two men step forward from the crowd. No armour, no shirts sometimes, just thick wool trousers, worn leather boots and fire in their eyes. The rules? Simple. You grab the other man by the shoulders, you stare him down, and then you try to kick his shins until he falls over. That's it. No timeouts, no judges, no mercy. If he yells, you keep going. If he limps, aim lower. If he goes down, you win. It sounds absurd, it was. But it was serious. Men trained for this. They stuffed hay into their pant legs for padding, like makeshift shin guards. Others didn't bother. They wanted to feel it, to prove they could take it. It was often part of larger festivals. May Day, harvest fairs, midsummer madness. Somewhere between the pie-eating contests and the livestock parades, two guys would just decide, let's destroy our legs for entertainment. And the crowd? Oh, they loved it. Cheers, laughter, gasps when someone landed a particularly brutal kick. Betting, of course, always betting. It wasn't just sport, it was status. Win 3 in a row and suddenly your name carried weight in the village. Lose badly and you limped for a week, and everyone remembered. The fool once said, "You can tell the strength of a man by how he walks away from a shin-kicking match." And in some corners of the countryside, he wasn't wrong, because in a world without gyms, without leagues, without formal rankings, shin-kicking offered something raw, something stupid, something pure. Two men, two pairs of legs, and one very bruised winner. The joust of the headbutts, when helmets were optional. It wasn't always about knights in gleaming armour. Sometimes it was just two stubborn men, and their foreheads. This forgotten sport didn't have an official name in most records. Some called it the Nod, others simply called it the Idiot's Duel. But whatever it was called, it always ended the same way, with someone bleeding, someone laughing, and someone on the ground, wondering what year it was. The rules, ridiculously simple. You and your opponent stand toe to toe, you lean in, and you start headbutting back and forth. No dodging, no flinching, just rhythm and impact. First to back away loses, first to fall loses. first to pass out. Well, that's usually how it ended anyway. You didn't get a helmet. You didn't even get a warning. This wasn't knightly combat. This was pub-side madness, turned into a blood sport. Some villages had traditions. A barrel of ale went to the winner. A kiss from the prettiest girl went to the one who stayed standing. In one region, you got the honour of leading the next church procession. Imagine that. A man with a lump the size of a goose egg on his skull, proudly carrying the Holy Cross. And believe it or not, it wasn't always men. There are scraps of folklore, likely exaggerated, where two women settled disputes this way too. Locals claimed they were fiercer than the men, less hesitation, more follow-through. The fool once muttered, "It's not the strength of your skull, it's the story it tells after." And in this game, stories were carved in bone. Doctors didn't exist, not really. If you cracked something up top, you wrapped it in a cloth soaked in wine and hoped for the best. The idea of brain damage wasn't even on the map. You either recovered, or you didn't. And people watched this. Children, elders, dogs, all gathered in a rough circle, howling encouragement. Because deep down, it wasn't about who won, it was about who refused to back down, who took one more hit than anyone thought they could, and who had the wildness in their eyes to do it again next year. Blindfolded boar chase, sport, stupidity and squealing, it started with a bet. It always did. Somebody claimed they could catch a boar in under a minute. Someone else called them a liar. And then someone else said, "What if we blindfolded you?" And that's how a tradition was born. The blindfolded boar chase was part sport, part comedy, part near-death experience. It was usually reserved for feast days or harvest celebrations, those rare times when the entire village was full, drunk and itching for spectacle. The premise, a young boar, snorting, squealing, impossible to predict, was released into a roped-off arena. Think of a flattened patch of dirt surrounded by barrels, old carts and villagers 3 ales deep. Then, the challenger would be led in, blindfolded, no weapons, just a burlap sack in one hand and the cheers of an eager crowd in the other. The goal? Catch the pig, barehanded, before time ran out, or before the pig found its way under a fence and back into the woods. Now, if you're thinking this sounds ridiculous, that's because it was. But it worked, because the pig had the advantage. It saw everything. It heard everything. It moved like lightning on hooves. The blindfolded human, on the other hand, stumbled, crawled, lunged and flailed through dirt and manure, grabbing at air and squeals. The crowd roared. Coins were tossed. Sometimes they even threw extra obstacles in the ring, just to keep things interesting. If the challenger won, they got a free meal, a round of drinks, and village-wide bragging rights. If they lost, they were usually bruised, humiliated, and covered in mud. Or worse. The fool once said, "Chase a pig without your eyes and you'll find the truth of your soul." He may have been drunk, but he wasn't wrong. Because this wasn't just a test of agility, it was a test of humility, of how much shame one person could endure, and still come up laughing. And some did. They laughed with bloody noses. They laughed with limps. They laughed with a pig under their arm and a dozen voices chanting their name. For a few minutes they were heroes. Dirty, stupid, wild-eyed heroes, and that was enough. Fireball football, the game that burned the rules. No goalposts, no uniforms, and certainly no referees. Just a leather ball, soaked in oil, lit on fire. Welcome to Fireball football, also known in some regions as Shrove Tuesday madness. This wasn't the football, you know. It wasn't even medieval soccer. It was something far more dangerous, more chaotic, more beautifully insane. The field was the entire village. No, really. From the church gate to the blacksmith's forge, from the mill stream to the edge of the forest, everything was fair game. The only objective was to carry the flaming ball to a designated spot. That's it. How you got there didn't matter. Tackling? Of course. Tripping? Sure. Biting, scratching, pushing people into troughs? All allowed. And remember, the ball is on fire. Players wore thick leather gloves or wrapped their hands in soaked rags. It helped a little, not much. Some got creative. Helmets made from buckets, cloaks dunked in ale, boots dipped in mud for grip. It started with a loud bang, usually a church bell or sometimes just someone yelling "Go!" And then, madness. Dozens of men, sometimes hundreds, all chasing a ball that could blister your hands and singe your eyebrows. Women didn't play, but they didn't stay away. They watched, cheered, threw buckets of water or flour onto the crowd for fun. In some versions, two teams from opposite ends of the village clashed in the middle like an angry wave crashing into itself. In others, it was every person for themselves. The fireball moved fast, then stalled in a pile of limbs, then disappeared into a tavern, then reappeared on a rooftop. The game could last hours, sometimes days, and when it ended, there was no ceremony, just burnt hands, torn shirts, and a smoking ball tossed into the stream to cool. The fool once said, "If you've never chased fire with bare hands, you've never truly lived." No one disagreed, because to play fireball football was to dance with injury, to laugh at danger, to sprint through smoke and ash and come out the other side smiling. Some say it was banned. It wasn't. It just got too hot to handle. The log toss of doom, strength, pride, and splintered bones. You've heard of stone lifting, you've heard of the caber toss, but this was something far older and far less polite. They called it the log toss, but not the neat Highland Games variety. This was cruder, heavier, dangerous in all directions. Imagine a raw, uneven tree trunk, still full of sap, bark half-peeled, gnarly at both ends. No two logs were alike. That was part of the challenge. The setting? Open field. Maybe next to a monastery, maybe on a frozen river. Didn't matter, as long as the crowd could see. And the rules? Lift the log, carry it as far as you can, then throw it. That's it. But here's the thing. You couldn't drag it. You couldn't drop it halfway. And the throw wasn't just distance, it was about control. A clean arc, a full rotation, and landing upright was the mark of a true champion. Those who failed got laughed at. Those who succeeded got scars, and sometimes a broken rib, because these logs fought back. It was an all-body event. Grip strength, leg power, balance. You didn't just hoist the log, you became the log. Some men would bite their own tongues while lifting, blood dripping before the log even left the ground. Others screamed like they were in battle, and in a way, they were, because this wasn't about wood, it was about honour. Villagers brought their own logs, proudly, like weapons in the contest of war. You think you can throw ours? Try. The fool once said, "A man is judged not by his words, but by how far he can toss a piece of his forest." And he wasn't wrong. There were no medals, just ale, respect, and silence when the log flew farther than anyone thought possible. It was absurd. It was primal. It was unforgettable. And in the dirt, beneath the shouting, some part of you understood. This was the original gym, the original spectacle, the original test of raw, unfiltered will. The goose run, foul play on horseback. Let's talk about a sport that had no winners, only bruises, feathers, and a whole lot of shouting. It was called the goose run, and yes, it was exactly what it sounds like, except more disturbing, and somehow more competitive than you'd expect. It went like this. You take a goose. You tie it by the feet to a wooden frame, often a rope strung across a village lane or the gate of a barn. The goose alive, flapping, furious. Then you get on horseback, ride full speed under the rope and try to rip the goose off the line with your bare hands. That's the game. If that made you flinch, good. Even back then, some folks did. But others, they trained for it. You needed speed, grip and terrifying levels of focus. The goose wouldn't just dangle, it fought, screamed, bit, pecked. Some were greased beforehand either to make it harder or just for extra chaos. Riders would loop around the village green, line up again, try once more, until the goose finally gave. Or the rider did. And the prize? The goose, of course. Dead or alive, you took it home. Plus, you got bragging rights. And in some villages, the official title of Goose King for the day. Don't be fooled, this wasn't niche. In parts of medieval Spain, the Netherlands, and England, goose runs were the crowd event of the festival. People climbed fences to watch. Coins flew, so did insults. Sometimes riders were knocked off their horses. Sometimes they crashed into each other. There are records of broken arms, concussions, even a cart overturned by a spooked stallion. The fool once muttered, "If your Sunday plans include strangling poultry from horseback, perhaps rethink your theology." But no one listened. Not during harvest time. Not when the music was playing and the ale was free-flowing. For one chaotic hour, it was feathers over fear. And somewhere behind the cruelty, there was a thrill no one could deny. Because it wasn't really about the goose. It was about nerve, precision, and the simple, dangerous joy of doing something you absolutely shouldn't. Barrel jousting. Roll, ram, repeat. If you've ever looked at a large wooden barrel and thought, I could ride that like a warhorse, congratulations, you'd have fit right in. Barrel jousting was the kind of game that only made sense after too much ale, which is probably exactly how it began. Picture it. 2 grown men, one muddy meadow, each perched atop a heavy ale barrel, legs tucked in, knees shaking. They're holding poles, sometimes brooms, sometimes real lances, dulled at the tip. At a shouted signal, no horns, just a yell, they shove off and start rolling toward each other. Not riding horses, not even pushing from behind, just trying to stay balanced as gravity and chaos do the rest. The first rule, don't fall off. The second, try to knock the other guy down before he knocks you down. The barrels were never smooth. They creaked, cracked, bounced over stones. Sometimes they split mid-match, sending their riders face first into the mud. Spectators loved it. They laughed, they pointed. They cheered for their favourites. Usually the biggest guy with the least sense of self-preservation. There was no armour, no padding. Just bruises and splinters and the pride of a village idiot turned local legend. Barrel jousts popped up during market fairs, wedding feasts, even saints' days. They weren't sacred, they weren't formal, they were just funny and wild and secretly more dangerous than they looked. You see, the poles weren't always soft, and when 2 bodies collide at speed, barrel or not, something's gonna give. The fool once said, you haven't lived until you've been hit in the ribs by a man screaming atop a whiskey barrel. And truly, few had. Winners got bragging rights, losers got black eyes, and the barrels? They usually got retired, or repurposed as seats in the tavern afterward, because in the end, barrel jousting wasn't about skill. It was about nerve, staying on just 1 second longer than the other guy, and being able to walk home, sort of. The cheese chase, gravity's cruelest sport, it starts with a hill, a very, very steep hill. Then someone pulls out a wheel of cheese and lets it go. And just like that, dozens of full-grown adults throw themselves down after it. This wasn't just sport, it was insanity, wrapped in dairy. Known in some regions simply as the cheese chase, this bizarre game has roots deeper than records can trace. Some believe it started as a fertility rite, Others think it was to honour spring, or to cleanse the village of bad spirits. But for the people who played, it was a chance to prove they were faster than fate, and tougher than the earth itself. Here's how it worked. You'd find the steepest hill in the region, sometimes dry, sometimes wet, sometimes half frozen. At the top, the elders or whoever had survived it last year would hold up a heavy round of cheese. A signal was given. The cheese was launched, and the crowd exploded into motion. They didn't run. Not really. They tumbled, flipped, slid on their faces, elbows, backsides. Gravity didn't care. People cartwheeled over each other. Boots flew, teeth loosened, sometimes bones snapped, but no one cared. The goal was simple: catch the cheese, or at least be the first to reach the bottom. No helmets, no rules, just sheer momentum and a few strategically placed bushes to maybe stop you from rolling into the creek. The prize, the cheese itself. Seriously, that was it. One gloriously smashed, slightly muddy, maybe a bit bloody wheel of cheese. And a story no one would ever let you forget. Some ran it every year, some only once, some never walked quite the same afterward. The fool once said, "We chase cheese not because it runs, but because we must fall before we rise." He was laughing when he said it, mostly because he had grass in his mouth and one shoe left. But maybe that's the point. The cheese chase wasn't about victory, it was about abandon, letting go, trusting the hill to catch you or not. It was raw joy, and pain, and tradition, and the fastest way to break your dignity while becoming a local legend. Drowning Day, the tug of war with a moat. Some sports need balance, others need courage. This one needed both, and a complete disregard for drowning. They called it Drowning Day in some regions. In others it was just the pull. But whatever the name, it always ended in someone soaked, someone gasping, and everyone howling with laughter. Here's how it went. You'd find a ditch, or a muddy creek, or, if you were particularly ambitious, the edge of a castle's moat. Then came the rope. 2 teams, 10 men each, or 20, or more. It didn't matter, as long as the sides were somewhat even, and the crowd had a clear view. At a signal, usually a shout or the ringing of a tankard, the pulling began. But this wasn't your gym class tug of war. The middle of the rope dangled over the water. Whoever lost didn't just get pulled forward, they got dragged straight into the drink. And here's the twist. Some wanted to lose. Because for all the pride at stake, Drowning Day often happened in summer, in full sun, when the fields were dry and the air was thick. To get pulled into the moat, it was refreshing. But don't be fooled. Most still fought like mad, teeth clenched, feet dug deep into mud. The old would square off against the young, the blacksmith's apprentice against the miller's boys. Villagers took sides, shouted names, bet food, occasionally wrestled each other over whose team was better. The water, cold, murky, smelled like duck feathers and algae. But when you hit it, splashing, flailing, it felt like flying, for a second, until the mud sucked at your boots and the rope coiled around your knees. The fool once said, "A man shows his soul not by winning, but by how loudly he gasps for air when the moat takes him." And truly, every gasp was earned. No prizes were given, only towels, if someone remembered to bring them. Sometimes they'd go again, swap sides, pull until arms burned and laughter drowned out the bell that called them home. Because this sport wasn't about strength, it was about surrender, to the mud, to the splash, to the moment when pride and water met in glorious chaos. Head-butting contests, the crown of the fool, no armour, no weapons, just skull versus skull. It wasn't war, it wasn't personal, it was just Tuesday. Known in some areas as the Rams game, This strange medieval pastime was half sport, half ritual, and fully stupid. It was the kind of competition that only made sense if you'd grown up watching goats fight in the field and thought, I could do that better. The rules? Simple. 2 participants stand face to face, hands behind their backs, no flinching, no dodging. On the count of 3, they lower their heads and slam. The first to step back, fall or pass out loses. Yes, you read that right. There were no helmets, no padding, just raw bone and whatever skull thickness genetics had blessed you with. Crowds formed around these bouts like moths to fire, because it wasn't just about pain, it was about endurance, pride, and the strange medieval belief that the strongest head made the wisest man. Sometimes it was a quick knock and done. Other times 2 men would butt heads over and over, faces reddening, knees buckling until someone blinked or vomited. The local healer hated these contests. Foreheads split open, noses broke sideways. One wrong angle and you'd be coughing up teeth for weeks, but the audience, they loved it. They'd chant, they'd place bets, they'd slap the loser on the back with a hearty laugh and offer him ale through a cracked grin. In some villages there was a rotating title, the Ram King, a crown made of woven reeds and sheep bones, mocking, yes, but respected in its own bizarre way. The fool once whispered, we are all one knock away from wisdom or memory loss, whichever comes first. And when your ears were ringing and your vision was wobbling, that quote made perfect sense. There was no training for this, just stubbornness, thick eyebrows, and maybe a little madness. But if you won, you walked a little taller, wobbled maybe, but taller, because in a world ruled by nobles and knights, a peasant needed other ways to prove his worth. And if that meant cracking heads until someone yielded, so be it. Blindfold boxing, the sweet science of swinging wild. You can't see, but you can hear the crowd, smell the sweat, feel the dirt under your bare feet, and somewhere, right in front of you, a fist is coming. Welcome to blindfold boxing, a sport so ridiculous, so deeply unwise, that it could only have thrived in the medieval world. Here's how it worked. 2 opponents stood inside a hastily drawn ring, usually just a circle scratched into the dirt or lined with hay. Each was blindfolded with a strip of linen, sometimes still damp from being rinsed in ale or tears. No rounds, no bells, just flailing until someone gave up or fell down. The crowd, unforgiving. They yelled, laughed, sometimes gave false directions to trip up their favourites. Left, left, no, your other left. Competitors stumbled in circles, arms out like scarecrows, occasionally connecting with thin air, or each other. When a hit actually landed, the shock of it drew roars of approval. Not because it was clean, but because it was rare. And the fighters, they weren't professionals. They were farmers, masons, tanners, drunk on pride and sometimes just drunk. The match would end when someone hit the ground hard enough to stay there, or when a friend stepped in with a cloth and mercy. Winners got a jug of cider. Losers got a new respect for how many directions pain could come from. Occasionally, things escalated. One man might throw off the blindfold early. Accusations would fly. Fists, too. Sometimes it turned into a full brawl. And honestly, most people preferred that. At least then the hits had targets. The fool once remarked, blindfold a man and you'll see his truest form. Awkward, angry, and swinging at ghosts. And if the ghosts hit back, even better. In truth, blindfold boxing wasn't about victory. It was about the spectacle, the chaos, the communal gasp when someone fell backward into a pig trough. It was ridiculous, it was dangerous, and it was never, ever boring. Fireball football, where scorched eyebrows were a badge of honour. You've heard of football, but not like this. Not when the ball is on fire. Yes, fireball football, a real thing. A terrifying, exhilarating, utterly bonkers medieval tradition where men would kick, throw, and chase a flaming object across a field, a village square, or sometimes straight through the marketplace. It started, as many strange traditions did, with a festival, usually around Shrovetide when winter was waning and people were looking for something, anything, to shake off the cold. A ball soaked in alcohol or oil was set ablaze, and then the match began. The rules? Loose. The field? Often undefined. The teams? Everyone and no one. The goal was to get the ball to a specific place, maybe the church door, maybe the steps of the Lord's manor, maybe a hole someone had dug and declared the goal. Along the way, anything went. Tackling? Yes. Shoving? Yes. Setting your tunic alight by accident while trying to pick up the ball with your bare hands? Also yes. And the crowd? They weren't just spectators, they were participants. Children ran alongside, shouting. Old women clutched rosaries and shook their heads. Tavern keepers prayed their barrels wouldn't get kicked over in the melee. The fireball itself changed throughout the game. What began as a neat leather pouch became scorched, cracked, and sometimes exploded mid-air if too much oil had been used. People emerged from the smoke with blackened fingers and singed beards. And still they played. There was something wild, almost sacred in the chaos. Fire was feared, but here it was tamed, chased, kicked, tackled. The fool once muttered, only a man with nothing to lose would punt the sun. But they did, over and over again. No real prizes, no medals, just cheers, blistered palms. And a good story for the tavern bench, because fireball football wasn't just about bravery, it was about release, community, and proving, if only for an afternoon, that you could dance with danger and walk away laughing. Rat tossing, the sport no one brags about. Not all sports are glorious. Some are necessary, and some are just bizarre coping mechanisms wrapped in laughter and flying vermin. Enter rat tossing, perhaps the least dignified, least celebrated, and somehow most communal game ever played in medieval alleyways and barnyards. The name is exactly what it sounds like. Step 1. Catch a rat. Alive, preferably. Half the fun was in the squirming. Step 2. Choose your arena. A village square, a stable yard, anywhere with enough space for a crowd and not too many valuables nearby. Step 3. Begin the toss. Men, women, even children lined up to hurl the unfortunate rodent as far as possible, usually with crude slings, leather gloves, or bare hands if they were brave or dumb. No elegance, no form, just distance. The rat didn't always go quietly. It wriggled, bit, sometimes doubled back mid-air, landing on the tosser's shoulder to squeals and chaos. But that was part of the thrill. This wasn't just sport. It was pest control made competitive, a way to keep spirits high while dealing with one of the Middle Ages' most unwelcome guests. To make it worse, or funnier, depending on who you asked, bets were placed on distance, on style, on whether the rat would land in the baker's cart or Sister Agnes's lap. And yes, occasionally rats were swapped out mid-game when they became too tired, or dead. One enterprising village even created a rat hoop, like a crude ring of branches hung from a tree for bonus points. No one ever hit it. But, oh, they tried. The fool once said, "There's no greater symbol of hope than a man aiming a rat like it's an arrow to heaven." No one knew what that meant, still doesn't, but he said it every year before the toss. Animal cruelty, absolutely. Disgusting? Without question. Unforgettable? Yes. And that was the point, because in a world of plague, famine, and mud-soaked misery, sometimes you had to find joy in the ridiculous, even if it squeaked. The goose pull, a game of feathers and fury. Let's get this out of the way early. This one is not for the faint of heart, or for anyone particularly fond of geese, because the goose pull was exactly what it sounds like, except worse. Imagine this: a goose, suspended upside down by its feet, neck stretched, wings flapping. It's been greased, yes, greased, until it's slicker than a butcher's countertop. It's hung from a rope or a branch just high enough for a man on horseback to reach. Now picture villagers lining a dusty road, cheering, jeering, waiting. One rider at a time charges at full gallop toward the goose. Their job? To grab the goose's neck and tear its head off. That was the game. Whoever succeeded was declared the winner. They got the goose and the glory. And probably some bruises from falling off their horse in the attempt, because the goose didn't make it easy. Even trussed up and upside down, it fought, it bit, it thrashed, and the grease made it nearly impossible to hold. Riders would leap, clutch, slip, spin out into the mud. Some injured themselves, others got laughed out of town. But if you won, you strutted. People bought you ale. The local girls smiled a little longer. You were the man who beat the greased goose. And for whatever reason, that meant something. There were variants too. Sometimes the game was played on foot, sometimes with chickens. Once in a richer village, they tried it with a small pig. It did not go well. The fool once said, "If you can hold the neck of a goose mid-flight, you can hold on to anything, even love." No one believed him, but they repeated the line anyway, every year, like it meant something more than feathers and broken fingers. Yes, it was cruel. Yes, it was chaotic. Yes, it was medieval to its core, because the goose pull was never about the bird. It was about bravado, about proving you had grip, guts, and no common sense, and in the Middle Ages that was practically a resume. Log dueling, the art of falling gracefully, no swords, no armour, no noble cause, just two men and one floating log. Welcome to log dueling, a bizarre riverside sport that combined balance, brawn, and an impressive willingness to fall face first into cold water. It started simply: find a big round log, roll it into the river. Two competitors hop on, one at each end. The goal: knock the other off, stay standing, don't drown. There were no weapons, unless you counted your feet or elbows, or the occasional well-timed splash of water flung into someone's eyes. Balance was everything, agility too, but mostly it was about instinct, knowing when to shift your weight, when to spin the log fast, and when to jump to survive. Some players danced gracefully like river sprites, others thrashed like drunks on stilts, and the crowd, they lined the river banks, cheering for every wobble. They roared when someone went under, soaking wet and flailing. Bonus points if the loser lost a shoe, a hat, or their pride. No fancy prizes, just bragging rights, and maybe the chance to challenge the next fool brave enough to step up. In some villages, log dueling became a tournament, dozens of men lining up to try their luck. A single log, one slippery, splintery stage. Winners were celebrated, losers were soaked. The log? Worn smooth from 100 muddy boots. It wasn't always friendly. Grudges formed, rivalries festered. Once two brothers fought so fiercely, they rolled the log a full mile downstream before tumbling into a patch of reeds. The fool, soaked and smiling, once said, "Life is like a log. You think you're balanced until someone else climbs on." And maybe he was right, because log dueling wasn't just sport. It was metaphor for competition, for survival, for the simple, joyful madness of keeping your footing when the world spins beneath you. And there you have it, 15 of the most jaw-dropping, completely unhinged yet somehow real medieval sports that history left buried in the margins. No arenas, no referees, just mud, madness, and the raw need to feel alive between harvests and hunger. These weren't just games, they were moments. Ways for peasants and townsfolk to escape the grind, challenge each other, and sometimes nearly get trampled or set on fire in the process. You won't find these sports on modern Olympic rosters. You probably won't want to try them yourself. But now, you know they existed, and maybe that's enough. If you made it all the way here, you're a true fan of strange history, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which of these insane sports surprised you the most? Which one would you be brave or crazy enough to try? Let me know in the comments. And if this video helped you wind down, sparked your curiosity, or just made you smile at the weirdness of the past, feel free to like and subscribe for more calm, immersive journeys into forgotten corners of history. Same time next time. Until then, sleep well, dream strange, and stay curious.